7th, 2021, and I would like to call the meeting to order. Would the clerk like to conduct roll call?
Sure. Sheriff Farmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Zadie,
Yeah.
Commissioner Cohen,
Here.
Commissioner Paulson,
Here.
and Commissioner McEnany.
Here. So I just like to check with staff to make sure that the proper notice has been established.
Yes, proper notice has been established.
Okay. So on to agenda item number 2, which is the approval of the agenda. Do we have any comments on that? So it looks like nobody has any comments on that, but does the public have any comments on this item?
No public comment has been received or filed.
Okay. So I would like to invite a motion.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I will second. I will second.
Lots of seconds.
Okay, so I guess we'll have a vote. Dee,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Peter, Peter, do you approve the agenda?
Yes.
And Paula
Yes.
and Kyle, yes. So the motion passes unanimously. On to agenda item number 3. I'd like to invite the public to speak on matters under the jurisdiction of the commission for any items that are not already on the agenda. And it looks like we're actually going to be able to allow the public to speak over the Zoom session if they would like to. They will be sort of invited into the speaking part of the Zoom. So is there any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay. So we're moving on to agenda item number 4, staff updates. And so maybe Sherry can let us know about some input that we received from the public. I think it was one letter.
Yes, Chair Farmer, Sherry Johnson, Executive Office. So prior to the meeting, we have not received any public input, but if attendees that are joining us would like to comment, then they can raise their hand and then the clerk will let them join the meeting.
Okay. And I think we're going to get an update from Leaf regarding our party census data. Leaf on the call.
Leaf, we will come right back to Leaf.
Yeah.
You should be joining us any moment.
So I guess without knowing what Leaf has to say, should we move on? It doesn't look like we're gonna have to vote anything on this, so we'll move on to item number 5 and we'll move back to item number 4. Yep, here comes Leaf.
Nadia Tipton, Executive Office. Leaf is on now, so we can resume with item 4B.
Leaf, if you want to take yourself off mute and let us know about what the latest on the release of the census data.
Well, the latest information I have is they're supposed to release the public law 94-171 file in a more easily usable format on Thursday, September 16th.
Okay.
It should be downloadable off their site.
So does the commission have any comments on that latest piece of information?
Again, I just want to mention it will not be adjusted for inmate population at that time, but at least we'll have the census data and for our county, I don't think there's a huge amount of difference, but we do officially have to use the data from the state when it becomes adjusted for inmate population. Just so everyone's clear.
Is what in past years, what kind of percent has that shifted things?
In past years, we have not had to use that.
Okay.
We just use the public law 94-171 file.
Mm-hmm. Okay, looks like Dee has a comment on this item.
Will it be available to us right away, or will there be a delay?
That I can't tell until I actually see it. I'm hoping it's, as they say, in a very usable, friendly format. I will be on that site on Thursday to download the data, and when I see actually what format it's in, I'll have a better idea. But it is available to the public. Anyone who wants to download that off the census.gov site is supposed to be able to do so.
Thank you.
So it looks like by our October 7th meeting, we'll have that information.
Well, I certainly hope so. We might even have state adjusted data by then.
That'll be good. Is there any public comment on this item?
No public comment has been received for item 4.
Sounds good. So we're on to agenda item number 5, redistricting overview for the general public. And so I think that's going to be Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair Farmer. I would ask if Nadia or Dylan, our clerks, could share the presentation. It's somewhat of a revised presentation from our last meeting. And once I see that everyone can see it, which it looks like we can, thank you. Does everyone see the PowerPoint presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's
Great.
Yes.
All right, so we wanted to, because not everyone joining us or maybe watching live or recorded today was with us at our last meeting, we always want to kind of give a brief overview of the criteria for redistricting and any updates or any changes that have developed. And so this will be familiar to all of you, and we want to make sure that the public has learns the same criteria, and we hope to also help inform future public comment on communities of interest in particular, because that is the type of information that we could be collecting right now from the public. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So this is just, as you see from last week, the basic overview of the criteria in order of priority. We have the required federal redistricting criteria, which is both the Equal Population and Voting Rights Act, Section 2, to the extent it applies in our county. And then we go into the various ranked state criteria. And actually, I wanted to add that Commissioner Pallison had noted, had a question last week about whether the state criteria, whether the federal criteria is also ranked. And the same state law, California Election Code 21500 and subsequent sections, addresses all of the criteria that the state requires. And in addition to the federal criteria, the state criteria also requires that all of our districts have substantially equal population. So that is part of the state law as well. And after any ranked state criteria, we can consider any other criteria as long as it isn't in conflict or direct conflict with our ranked criteria and any of the federal criteria. So as we go along, it may be that the Board of Supervisors or this commission has some other criteria they want to incorporate that might be in addition to the criteria we see here. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So again, just to go through the state criteria, We have contiguity. Again, this is when we're trying to keep districts from jumping around and joining only at a very small point, and keeping that the districts contiguous. The second prioritized criteria is to minimize division of local neighborhoods and communities of interest. And here is the quote from the statute, the California statute, that says a population that shares common social or economic interests that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. And so the statute gives us that nice definition that can help inform all of us and inform the public. And this is where, when we get into the communities of interest, which we're hoping to start hearing from the public, this is where we'll hear the stories of our communities and hope to show that these communities will be the building blocks for our districts. And through that, a theme that we want to consider is that whether the communities of interest are tied to concerns that are addressed at the county level. And that's something to consider when we're hearing any testimony or written comment. And then, of course, the section that says we cannot include or consider political parties as a basis of a community of interest. Next slide, please. The third ranked criteria is keeping together the cities and census designated places. As you know, the cities in the county and also all of these additional listed towns and communities that are recognized by the census. The fourth ranked criteria is easily identifiable boundaries. So this would be things like rivers, canyons, mountains. Those are some natural barriers. I know Commissioner Farmer and others raised also considering things like watersheds. That may be considered if it is something that is a distinct boundary that can be shown. Artificial barriers such as freeways, highways, railroad tracks that to some extent in our county that wouldn't be as significant with not having public transport via railroad, but it is still an artificial boundary that may define a community that's around it. And then the fifth criteria would be geographic compactness. And so we're trying to maintain areas so we're not bypassing nearby populated areas in favor for more distant areas. And as I noted, this isn't as highly ranked. So it may be that there is some, we're not always going to be as compact as we may like if we have to forego that for other more higher prioritized criteria. And then finally, the prohibited consideration of considering political parties. Next slide, please. So this is where I wanted to just talk for a few minutes about the criteria that we could be receiving right now and considering from the public right now, but even before we have our data from the census and before we start actually drafting maps with that data, and that is neighborhoods and communities of interest. So what we want to hear from the public is, what is your neighborhood and what are the boundaries of your neighborhoods? And also for a community of interest, what defines your community, and would your community benefit from being included within a single district for fair and effective representation, or would it maybe benefit for having multiple representatives? That's a consideration. Next slide, please. And these are some of the questions we thought might be useful for the public in considering, how do I know, how do I determine if my community of interest? And one of these are some of the questions that communities can ask themselves. Who are we? What do the members of our community share in common? What is our shared history, if any, shared languages, any shared celebrations or values? And then what makes this community unique from others? What differentiates this community from surrounding areas? And where is this community? Can we map this community? Because that is a central principle of redistricting, is what are the physical boundaries that can show our community on a map for purposes of representation by a supervisorial district? And then also, how are that community's interests shared? What are the issues that the community wants attention from the local government? What are there can be lots of different types of concerns and interests, anything from recent natural disasters. It could be social, political concerns that are socioeconomic concerns. Maybe a community is primarily lower income, and how does that, how can their interests be protected or fairly represented in a distinct area and be considered by one supervisorial district? So these are some of the questions that we wanted to share and hope the public will read and consider in coming up and offering their proposed communities of interest. Now, from that, those communities of interest could be provided through, for example, we have a form on our website that we'll remind everyone about a little bit later, but the form that asks for a narrative, describe who you are, what is your community of interest. It could also be mapped. It could be, someone could create a map and provide a narrative with a map. These are the ways that we can hear those communities of interest. And then another thing to consider, the public can consider, is there any numerical data, anything that helps show our story, our community of interest? And this could be things like statistics that may be available on income levels and numbers and distances. And there's a lot of different ways numbers can be a useful tool as well for describing a community of interest. Next slide, please. So we wanted to give this general overview of the criteria and also describe a little more into detail about communities of interest in the hopes that we'll garner some more public input. And we also have here the same slides from last week on census data. I know Leaf gave an update already, but it might be useful to do, again, an overview for the public on the required census data and perhaps some of the steps we go through in using that data. And then finally sharing the redistricting form, community of interest form, and we'll go from there. So thank you, and of course at the end, if anyone has any questions, before we move on to our next agenda item, we can certainly answer those questions.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Even better than the first time I watched it. Are there any comments from the commission? I think I can see it. Oh, there you go, Peter. Go ahead.
I can't see myself. Can we, there we go. Conceptually, I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around, as we pull this information together, how we can display it in a way that's meaningful to people. And one thought I had was that we could develop a chart that has columns, and along one side of the chart would be these criteria that we're supposed to utilize in order to evaluate the compliance with the law and the suitability of the reapportionment. And then running across the chart, or excuse me, in columns running down the chart, would be what a proposed map, how well it complies with those requirements. And we might start out, for example, with the current boundary lines and examining them in the context of the criteria that we have. So we would just list that as a column, current map boundaries, and then proceed down that list of criteria to determine how well in each of those categories the current district lines would comply with the criteria that have to be utilized. And then as additional proposals were put forward for adjusted maps, we could give them a title and then again list them in that chart and compare them based on those criteria. And in that way, the commission, but also the public, would have a sense of how well the maps comply with the requirements. And so I wanted to sort of throw that out as a thought early on in the process before we actually start getting the data and start filling things in for the commission to consider and for the staff if they have some thoughts in terms of how they intend to present the alternative maps as they manifest themselves to the commission, if they have some other thought in mind for how they're going to do that.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think that sort of matrix would be a great addition and sort of a way to structure our thoughts. I don't know if you know, this is how many redistrictings have there been at this point? I wonder what they did in 2011 and if they did something similar. But that's always a great way to try to hold complex information in your head. Anybody else? Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Farmer and Commissioner McNamee for your input. I think a matrix would be useful. I think one thing we want to keep in mind is we can't start drafting maps yet. We can start receiving the communities of interest testimony, but we do have a short waiting period when we get the official public law census data, and then it's reapportioned. The state prison population is reapportioned, and while I don't anticipate that'll result in significant changes to Mendocino County's population, we do technically have to wait. We are projecting, the statute has 2 different waiting periods. Given how close we are to the official deadline, I think we'll likely have the 1-week waiting period. So I would not recommend that we start with, I don't know if it would be a good idea to start with any maps, even using the official maps that are our districts right now, until we get that data in. But in the meantime, I think it does make sense, and we would certainly, staff would certainly be able to summarize all public comment on communities of interest for this commission. That's part of our role, is to help you see what input we receive. And then as we get to the point when we can start drafting maps, if one of the proposals you all as a majority agree would be worth considering, and if it meets the initial substantial equal population considerations, we could offer that as an example, but we do have that waiting period. Thank you.
Go ahead, Leif.
Thank you. In the past, you know, we've made draft maps when it was time to actually draw boundaries. The various versions available in both hard copy and on our websites. So you have a couple of options. You know, if someone, the public, say, came up with a version of the boundaries that they wanted to present, we can, you know, it's inherent on us to then hold that up against the criteria, but also to make it available to the public so other people can see that. We can put alternative versions as layers on the public GIS portal redistricting map, and complete with some of the statistics that go along with those once we've calculated them. So in other words, somebody comes up with some different ideas of what these districts are. The first thing we need to do is, you know, the big one is, are the populations within range of being what's considered equal? You know, that alone will tell you how far down the road you want to go with the rest of the criteria. If it doesn't meet that criteria, then there's not a lot of sense trying to figure out, and it's a qualitative value in many cases. It's not really a statistical value of, how compact is my district or how contiguous is it? Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. So you're going to get a range of how well you meet those criteria, and a lot of times it's going to be subjective. But the population is an actual number that you have to test. So we always start with that. And we can make maps and have PDFs on the site that you could click on and say, here's all the versions the public's come up with, the redistricting committee has come up with. We can label those and we can put statistics on those maps so people can look at a PDF, they can print it out, or we could have it on our, as I say, on each version and layer on our public GIS portal. So there's a couple of options. And again, the way it was done in the past is the way we have to do it now is we, as Charlotte was mentioning, we have to take the public input and see where those communities of interest are and what people's reaction is to how they want us to move forward. And I think a lot of that's going to dictate where those lines are going to be.
Peter, it seems like what you were trying to propose is simply, as we move forward, that we can continue to consider the best way to present information to the public that might kind of join in a little bit later and haven't been watching every meeting, and that if we have this matrix idea in our heads, we can, know when to start populating it. That's sort of what you're bring in.
That's right.
Yeah. So is there any other comment from the commission on this topic? I have a question. Is there any way, Leaf, you mentioned the sort of a lot of the shapes are really sort of quite obvious, and then there's these places that have been sort of traded back and forth through time, and that's something that you're aware of, but is there any place to get a historical perspective on this?
Well, one of the things where Charlotte mentioned is they actually advise us not to look at lines at this point in the process because we're gathering information from the public, which is supposed to guide us. But I have various maps from the decades past that do show the districts as they were in previous decades. But we can certainly share, after we do the waiting period and we have the ability to look at lines, we can certainly share that with everyone.
That'd be great. Yeah, I was looking online. I couldn't find any historical data. Go ahead, Charlotte.
I was just going to add, I do think it's possible for us to share, if to the extent the county has information on shifts in population, I think we can share that information with you. The only limitation we have is not creating a draft map yet. So that I think it may be possible for us to share that if and when staff is able to review that and present that. So I don't think we have a waiting period on sharing that information necessarily.
So should we move on to public comment on this? Where I do think we did have one letter. I was confused earlier, but this is where I do think we had one letter.
No public comment has been received for item 5.
Okay, so let's move on to item number 6. This is inputs on communities of interest. And I think staff is going to update us on if anybody's submitted public comment on this.
Yeah, Chair Farmer. We have received today one community of interest information from one community member, and all of the commissioners have received that information. in their email, and it has also been published on our website.
So does anybody want to comment on that letter? Is that what we would be doing now, or commenting generally on the process? Sherry, sorry, that was a question for you. Is that
Oh,
is
yeah.
this next item moving? Are we commenting on the letter?
Yeah, you would comment if there's any questions or any comments on the information submitted, correct?
Okay. So I guess I do have a comment if nobody else does first. That's kind of where I was thinking about wanting to understand more of the history of this. As we received, there was a comment in that letter suggesting, and I've heard it from other people, that through time there's been political reasons why districts have been shaped the way they were, and that's something that it would be interesting to understand. You know, rather than receiving sort of rumors from the public, being able to kind of be able to understand that in a more analytical way. Go ahead, Lee.
Yes, Chair. As you go through the process, you hear from a lot of different people. And in the past, I mentioned that we went to a lot of communities and had town hall meetings. There's a lot of input, and someone might say, well, hey, you can't do that because then Supervisor X is not going to be in his district anymore. Things like that always come out in public meetings. There's lots of other variables that come out in public meetings. What I think you have to be careful of is looking at the predominance of the sort of the consensus of what you hear from the public, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at consensus. Where does the majority of these people, who live in an area, what are their feelings about their communities of interest, and how they're going to be represented by these boundary lines. So you're going to get a lot of different things, and people will bring that back up. Hey, this happened at so-and-so. It doesn't mean that the decision was made based on a political decision. It just means that someone mentioned that at the time, and that became part of the record, the public record. So you have to be a little careful with that. But that's all I need to say on that.
I completely agree. And that's why I was suggesting that we might bring a little bit of a historical perspective rather than the historical perspective simply coming from public comment, a little bit more of an understanding, at least in the past maybe two processes, how the lines ended up where they were, so that we're not simply sort of bouncing between any public comments that we get, but that we can keep the larger perspective.
If I may, Chairman, I don't think that was I think the member from the public was trying to give a little historical background in that, but I think the main focus of his comments were a little different. He did point out that he sat on several boards, and that one being the Brook Trails Community Service District, and he kind of mentioned the Sherwood corridor. He did talk about the city of Ukiah being sort of unique, and then he mentioned sort of the overall current position, what he felt about the current position, and towards being favorable with minor adjustments. So mentioned about 3 different things considering communities of interest. So I thought that was pretty good and very clear on that point. But I think a lot of it was trying to give some historical background to some of his experience. But I don't want to speak for that member of the public, but I think that just in reading it, that's how I interpret it.
No, I agree. It was a very valuable comment, especially for that from the LAFCO perspective as well. Mary, were you raising your hand?
Yeah.
Adjusting your ponytail.
I think I think he also raised one of the major community of interest, the first crack in the door to look at and he justified with how things were voted and distributed among power voting ability on different boards, including LAFCO. So I think it's, definitely a letter that should be weighed in consideration in the future.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I appreciate the staff's desire to sort of have a mechanism to collect this information in a standardized format so that you can collect all of that and sort of be able to examine them collectively as well as individual statements. But it raises this question, as the public attempts to provide input to us, they may not want or be able to follow that format. So what happens, and maybe legal counsel can advise us on this, what happens when somebody sends us an email, for example, saying that they have a particular concern about the reapportionment process, the redistricting effort here, and it's not in the format that's prescribed by the website that we have. How do we handle it at that point? And what happens to that input? So the simpler way of stating my question is, when the public doesn't comply with the format that we prescribed for providing input, and they provide it in another form, how will that be dealt with by the commission?
I think I can answer that for you pretty simply, and that is there's nothing restricting the format of the public input. So a member of the public could write a few sentences, and it could be an email without using the form. It could be calling into this public meeting and offering an oral description of their, explanation of their community of interest. It does not have to fit into any box. We can consider all public comment in any form, it's certainly important to be open to that. And I think the staff can help you to the extent there's certain public comment you want maybe some more analysis of that help support it and show maybe some more data if the comment was a story that didn't maybe have all of the data that might be useful to the commission that you might want to see, where we can always supplement that. So to answer your question, there's nothing restricting the way the member of the public provides that information to us. That was just maybe an effort on our part to help facilitate it. If you see some changes you'd like to make to that form, we can certainly make them as well.
Go ahead, Dee.
I'm just wondering, what if they reach out to us individually? Can we share that information?
Yes, I believe you can. There's nothing, in terms of the Brown Act, there's nothing prohibiting those individual conversations or receiving the information. We just think it's useful to then either if you forwarded it to the redistricting at mendocinocounty.org address, or also recommend to the person who's reaching out to you, why don't you send this on to our formal email address so we can make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks and all public comment is received by the commission. So that's certainly appropriate. And I know we talked a little bit about that last week, but that's a very good question. Yes, you can. And we would just recommend, to the extent you're asked questions about, well, how are you going to vote on this, and what are you going to do with this? You can have those individual conversations, but it's always more, there's less of a risk of any, snowball of a maybe a serial meeting or the like, if you kind of try to tread the balance of not getting into too much about how you're going to decide an item, and saving those kinds of discussions for the public meeting and with the discussions with the majority of your board present at the public meeting.
Okay, that sounds great. And just to extend on that, what about our personal opinions? Like if I felt really strongly about something, had just a process question, how do I share that? Just in the conversations, the discussions we have in the meetings, or should I do anything to where do I have to do anything else?
I don't think you have to do anything formal other than sharing your opinion with the commission, and you can also take opportunities to bring it up if there's at any opportunity when the agenda is calling for discussion on an issue that raises and raises that issue of concern for you.
I think it would be really helpful for us at some point fairly soon in the process for us to kind of throw out there any ideas that we have that we may be working on, thinking of individually, so that we kind of know where each other's coming from in this. If we're bringing something to the agenda of redistricting.
Thanks. Do you want to go ahead, Peter?
Yeah, just to follow up a little bit on my earlier question. So I received an email this week from someone expressing a point of view in terms of how they'd like to see the maps redrawn. And I forwarded that to the redistricting at mendocinocounty.org website. And so I wanted to get clarification. So first, is that the appropriate procedure for handling those kinds of emails that are received from the public or any other kind of communication?
Nadia, it's an executive office. Yes, the redistricting at mendocinocounty.org email is a great spot to forward any correspondence or emails received. We will attach anything received that's in relation to a specific agenda item, and we'll call it out. If we receive something for item 4A, we would attach it to item 4A. If it was general public expression, we could attach it to the general public expression item on our agenda. If it's not relevant to that meeting's particular agenda, we would distribute it to all 5 of our commissioners.
Okay, so there'll be a standing agenda item in the future for communications that are unrelated to a specific agenda item from the public. So if any emails come and I forward them to there, then I would anticipate that they would be attached to that item. Or is that just going to be public comment matters from the public? Or public comment matters from the public?
That is for anybody calling in. Item 3 on our standing agenda is for any members of the public who wish to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. So they could call in and provide comment during that item. If we were to receive email that is for an item not on the agenda, but it's requested that it be attached to agenda item number 3, we can do that as well.
Okay, so what I'm concerned about is there seems to be this place where a crack in the process where things fall through and they don't show up for discussion by the full commission. If somebody just sends you an email and says, gee, I'd like to see district number 3's line moved over 5 miles because I think that would be a better place for that line to be. Where does that show up on our agenda for the next meeting?
So if it's not agendized, the commission could not do a motion or take action on that item. So any public comment that's not for an agendized item would go and be attached to item 3, and that could be received by the commission, but you couldn't take action on that item.
I see. Okay, so it will go into item 3 as just an email received since the last meeting, like correspondence.
Correct.
And it will be shared with everybody. Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you very much. That clarifies it for me. And now I'm not concerned about something falling through the cracks.
Charlotte, I see every hand raised. I just want to add on to Peter so you can respond to both of us if I'm confused as well. If, however, that person said, based on my community of interest, I think the line should be 5 miles this way, that would be then under this agenda item number 6 right now. If that's the way.
Sorry.
Yeah,
to
ahead.
answer your question, Chair and Commissioner, I think with this commission, we have a pretty broad topic, or a pretty narrow topic of redistricting. So I think we can consider public comment. Staff. We could have a regular agendized item that staff updates and input received from the public, as we had today. It sounds like maybe the particular email that got forwarded wasn't received by the staff in time, maybe to address it today in the staff updates. But we can figure out if there was some glitch with that on as to the forward from Commissioner McNamee. But I don't see that it would. I don't see it would be often that we would have something that couldn't be considered if it was forwarded to the redistricting email, and as long as there was not so many emails that staff wasn't able to get through all of them in time for the meeting to be able to summarize input received from the public and log that. I hope that answers your question.
Dee, do you feel like your question about when the time will be to sort of start talking in more detail was satisfactorily answered?
Yes, only because no one said, no, you can't do that. So I feel more confident about that. So yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I think I've got a truck with bad injectors that you have to let sit for a while before you can drive it. And I feel like the lack of census data is creating that kind of phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so once we have those numbers, which that'll be that October 7th meeting, and we can start kind of getting into a little more detail. Otherwise, like the maps can't really even be drawn. So is there any public or any other commissioners want to say anything about this item? I definitely think we'll be hearing more from Tony because he definitely has a lot to share, especially in regards to the 3rd district area in the middle of the county where he is the most passionate about. So is there any public comment on this item?
No public comment has been received for agenda item 6.
Okay. I guess we get to move on to agenda item number 7, mapping tools training, and we'll get to learn more from Leaf.
As of our last meeting, we did add watershed boundaries to the redistricting map we have on our public GIS portal. We worked on a bit of a tutorial that's, I think, ready to go now, and I'm working with information services staff to link that to the actual map so that you can say, here's on the gallery and on the map, click this link to figure out if you have trouble navigating or using the tools on the portal site, make that a little easier for people. See if I can show you something really quickly here on how we're finding the site. And I want to share my screen. Share that screen. Let me bring this over here. Hold on. To the site. Okay, does everybody see this? My page looks like the County Mendocino webpage. Okay.
Yes.
There's a couple of different ways you can get to our site. I usually pick, an easy way is just pick Services tab right here on the Mendocino County site. You can, a little bit, scroll down and you'll see GIS at the bottom of the services list. You click on that, it takes you to the gallery. You can navigate to the redistricting map and it opens it up. Another way to do this, that we've added a link to our redistricting site. If you're on the redistricting site, and I'll just navigate to that right now. So we have redistricting at the site here. And if you scroll down on the left-hand side where this green bar is, it says Map a Community of Interest, GIS Mapping Tool. And this takes you right to the map application so that you don't have to go through the gallery if you don't want to. But either way, it's an easy way to get to the site. Just to show you what we've added since you've seen it last. Watersheds here. And I can enable the pop-ups there. So anytime I click on a watershed, it's going to give me the name of the watershed. The Eel River watershed is broken up. So it's so large and different parts connect in another county. We have the North Fork, Middle Fork, the main stem, and the South Fork. You can see down here we have the Russian River watershed, which is the next biggest one. And you do have an acreage figure here just to give you an idea of the size. And you can see the different communities in each watershed. You can then go back and look at the census designated places in each watershed. And of course, the city boundaries here as well. And I did modify these a little bit in that, you know, I coalesced the Russian River one so you don't have to see upper and lower. I did, there were a lot of little tiny ones on the coast that were coalesced together. These were two watersheds for two creeks. But if it was labeled as such. There's the Elk Creek and Greenwood Creeks watershed and the Alder and Bush Creeks watershed that I put together since you wouldn't have to see a bunch of little tiny ones. You can get a better idea of what communities are in which water district. So that's there. And again, that's how you get to this particular map. And you can, of course, look at different ideas besides watershed that we looked at the last time, communities of interest. You know, some of our criteria is we're not supposed to split up incorporated cities or census designated places. And again, this is the 2010 population density. If I enable, let's see, county boundary, I click on just the county, you can see the whole thing is highlighted. Here again, it gives you the 2010 population and the 2020 population that we do have now for the county. And it breaks it up into the different categories. So you get a little bit of updated data and you can see how the county has grown and what the racial makeup of the county is. As we get into block data, then we'll have the pieces, as I mentioned in our last meeting, the sort of the building blocks of these districts. And if you enable the communities, let's cities. Okay. I did add, as I showed you the last time, we can see the 2010 population and 2020 population for each of the 4 incorporated cities, give you an idea of which areas the county may be growing, which ones may not be growing. So that's all that we've done so far with this application. And again, You can use this to draw a community of interest. And I went over that last time, and I don't know if the chair wants me to go over that again, or I can certainly do that, but I think you've seen that the last time we did this demonstration.
Can I ask staff if there's anyone watching this that wasn't watching it the last time that would benefit from this? I don't know if that's something I could be able to see from my Zoom perspective or not.
Well, I can quickly go over that just in case.
Okay. Yeah, just in case if there's no way to know if,
Right.
or I guess somebody could end up watching the recording. So
Well,
minutes over it.
There's various ways to zoom in and out. You can use the plus and minus to zoom in and out. You can use if you have a scroll wheel on your mouse, which I'm doing right now, you can scroll in and out. You can hit down the shift key on your keyboard and drag with your cursor. That brings, and of course, as you zoom in and you zoom out, different layers appear based on the scale of the map and the display. I think one of the letter that we got today on areas of communities of interest mentioned the Sherwood Road corridor. You know, we can zoom in. We can see Sherwood Road here going through brook trails, you know, and coming out towards Willits. Again, brook trails itself is a census designated place. So you certainly wouldn't want to split that up. But if we're looking at the whole Sherwood Road corridor, it goes all the way up over here, I believe. And yep, Sherwood Road. To draw an area of interest, we use the draw tool, which looks like a little artist palette. It's down in the lower left-hand corner with the toolbar. I can pick draw. I have the various ways of doing this. I just generally pick the polygon version. And I like a boundary with a lighter shade in between. If you set the transparency to about 50%, then you can see the underlying information when you draw. There's a few other things you can pick, but that's the main thing. When it's activated, you'll see this click to start your drawing. So I'm going to go up here at the top, grab my whole Sherwood Road area, and I don't know exactly what the idea of the Sherwood, but you know, taking in some of the major subdivisions along Sherwood Road, and I'm just clicking as I go along. You can see my polygon is expanding, and I'll go down here to include some of these major subdivisions, and I'll double click. Okay, there I have my my community of interest. Say I'm going to call that. So now what do? I can print this out, which is actually creating a PDF that you can save to your hard drive or print out. But there's a print tool down here on the toolbar in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. I'll pick print. And it could be as easy as I want to choose the title of my map. I could say it's the Sherwood Road Community of Interest. I could just leave it at the standard is a portrait view in 8.5 by 11, but I have a few other choices. Say I might want to pick 11 by 17 in the portrait view, and then you just hit print. Okay, that's the easiest way of doing it. And you wait a few minutes while you can see the taskbar. It's creating your print. Then when it's completed, you can click on it. This would have had your title on here. And you have this map here. Then in this case, it's 11 by 17. It has a scale and a map explanation of the symbols. And of course, if you titled it differently, it would have your title on it. This is now a PDF. I can save this. I can print this to a printer, and I can send it into the county. I can attach the PDF as an attachment to an email and then email it to the redistricting site. And we can take this, and then we have a map to go on what you think the boundaries of your community of interest is. You can add an email describing, why you think it's a community of interest. You can use the form that's on the website. You can add that and reference the title of your map. So there's a couple of different ways. You can use a map and a description or both. And that would give us a very good idea of what your community of interest is. You can always turn off your PDF. You can go back, and if you want to redraw this, you can always clear this and go back to the palette and clear the map and then redraw it if you want. And that's just a very quick overview of the draw and print tools on this map. You want to go back to the original scale, you can always go up here to the upper left-hand corner and you'll see a little symbol that looks like a house. That's your home button. Click that and that goes back to the default scale. But you can do it anytime as you're zooming in or out. If you get lost, just go back to the home and get you back to the original view. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to entertain those.
I just have a question. I have it open on my computer going along with you, and I don't get the pop-ups like for the watersheds or any of that. When I click on it, nothing is, am I missing something on this?
Yes, and that's where the map guide comes in handy. But if you see my cursor on the screen, I'm going over to the layer list. I didn't really explain that too much this time, but there's a symbol up here in the upper right-hand corner. Right. That looks like a stack of papers. That's the layer list. And what it brings up is the map application. So there's a little arrow right there. If you click that, it opens up all of the layers on this particular map. If they're grayed out, it means that you just haven't zoomed in enough for them to pop up in the scale of the map. But on the right-hand side, you'll see a 3-dot ellipse. For any layer, you can click on that and enable pop-ups. And of course, if you want to shut that off, you just click on it and disable pop-up. Once you enable pop-ups, for instance, I'll look at the 2011 supervisorial districts. I'll enable pop-up. Now I can go over here and click on one. And this is the 2010 statistics for that particular district when it was created in 2011. You go over to the next one, you can see those, but you do have to enable it. One of the things you can do, although this gets a little confusing for when you have a lot of layers, is if you go up to this right away, the map application itself, you can enable pop-ups for everything. Let's see if I can get that to work here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you have a better idea what I'm clicking on. So I clicked on, I have enabled pop-ups for everything. So it pulled up the supervisorial districts, but you'll notice at the top, there's 4 other things here. Probably one's going to be the census designated place. Actually, it's the parcel that I clicked on because you can see it highlighted. That's the actual parcel. And there's the census designated place. And then also the county. See, so it does get a bit confusing if you have them on, all of them on at one time. So generally, you have to make that choice. I'm going to disable those. I find it a lot easier just to enable the ones I'm using. So in other words, if I wanted to see, I first clicked on public roads because I wanted to check Sherwood Road. I can click on that road, and sure enough, it gives me the statistics on Sherwood Road. I can go back and disable that because I don't want to see something on roads every time. Again, I can turn on the watershed layer and I can go over to the 3-dot ellipse. I can enable the pop-up and I can go over here and click on it. That shows me that's the Noyle River watershed. And over here is the main fork of the Eel River watershed. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You can always see the symbolization on these as well. You can click on right next that little arrow to the left of any layer, and you can open up what the symbol on the map looks like. You can always go up to the legend list up here, and it pulls up the same thing, but for all the layers at one time. I'll just click that off, and my layer list back on.
Thank you, Leaf.
Okay.
We have any commissioner comment on this item? I would just like to say that how thankful I am how quickly Leaf and you and your staff were able to, you know, put on this, you know, minor, but also I think kind of a big deal suggestion of these watershed layers. It's kind of remarkable how powerfully implicit watersheds are in our politics, whether or not that's ever been chosen, to the extent that, you know, the lines actually already are counting them to a certain extent, and very clearly the roads are. You know, very clearly the roads are following those ridge lines. So, anybody else have anything they want to say? Well, great. Hopefully the public is going to get to have a lot of fun with this tool. And there's just something kind of subtly fascinating about it, sort of the next level of democracy that some of these internet tools can enable, that the public can engage deeper into the day-to-day sort of technocratic side than historically has been possible. So I think that's a really exciting tool that you guys have put together there. Is there any public comment on this item?
No public comment has been received for item 7.
Okay. Well, once we finish with agenda item number 8, community outreach strategy, we're just going to have to add an extra hour to these meetings because we're going to have so much public comment. Would anybody in the commission like to start on some brainstorming, I guess, because we don't really have any more structured agenda on this. But I think we should take maybe 10, 15 minutes and try to come up with some ideas on public outreach, but also hear what staff has already been doing. And I'm sure that this is something that we could come up with ideas all day long about. And as I mentioned in the last meeting, this is also something we could probably just reach out directly to staff. And it's probably just more the better in terms of public outreach. There's probably not anything we shouldn't do unless Charlotte says it's not legal. So.
This is Paula. I would like to hear what staff has already planned so that we kind of can build on what they've been obviously previously used, and then go forward from there.
Sounds good. Sherry, would that be you?
Yes, Chair. I can start with that, and then appreciate any input from staff from Nadia or Dylan. So as we have now, we have e-notification. So whenever there's a press release or any information, that public can sign up for what we call e-notifications. So then the blast will go out to all participants that have signed up. So right now we have about 900 participants registered, and that can be businesses too, just not individuals. So that goes to the papers, to the radio stations. So that's information that we have right now. And also we do social media pushes where we put it out on Facebook. We've sent out some, received some information, some additional emails and contacts from Commissioner Cohen. So then added those to the notifications also. I think that is what we have been doing. And Nadia, have I missed anything that we've been doing?
Nadia Tipton, Executive Office. No, Sherry, I think you covered it. We have our e-notification online. We send those blasts out. I post to the Mendocino County Facebook page. When we stream these meetings, we stream them live to Facebook as well as YouTube. So the public can call in and listen to those live streams as well if they're unable to watch due to connection issues.
And I think there was one article written, one of the local news sources that I read. I don't remember which one it was. Am I correct in that?
Yes, I believe that was the Mendocino Voice.
So is there a way that we can get copies of those, or we can, if somebody notifies them, sees them? I know that's probably a big ask, but, I do things on the local coastal stuff, but I don't always see things from inland. And then another question I definitely have is kind of, are we also participating in the Spanish radio stations or newspapers that they have that are all in Spanish to make sure we get that population notified?
So we, through the chair, we are working to have the agenda and that information translated, and that we will be sending that also to our contacts in the community.
Okay.
And Paula, I don't know if you noticed in the agenda too that there is a service that can translate these meetings if somebody makes that request.
Yeah, I did see that. If we are going to, or think about writing letters to the editor or notifying groups that we participate in, should we, and I think I asked this last time, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, should that also be routed through the redistricting commission, send one to everybody, send one to Sherry, who would then get it out? I don't want to do something that's going to, be a problem for anybody else, but I have a list of things that I've previously done for the census work.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Cohen. I think a couple things. The commission could consider, each commissioner could consider doing outreach if they wanted to individually, and then maybe report back to as maybe a standing item to the commission. This is the type of outreach that I did with various community groups, recommend, inviting them to the meeting or recommending they submit their input, and or also the commissioners can share that with staff, and we can provide and facilitate the outreach as well. I think it could be either way that works best.
Okay.
So I think from a couple questions that I've had, and I know mine hinted at this too, and one of Dee's questions hinted that we might be, as a commission, a little over understanding the Brown Act in terms of our ability to act as individuals. Does that seem correct to you, Charlotte, that we might have kind of been a little spooked and didn't understand what you were saying?
I'm not sure, but I think I want to assure you that as individuals, you can have individual conversations and conduct some outreach on your own, as well as using staff to facilitate that outreach on behalf of all of yourselves. And I think how you want to then share that with the group, either summarizing each meeting, the information, the invites that you maybe made to the community, or if you want to then have it logged through the commission. I think it's useful for the public to see see as much information from the community and from your own outreach. So using staff and using the redistricting email is a useful tool, I think. But I don't want to suggest that you can't have individual conversations and use your connections with community groups yourselves as well.
Thanks for that clarification. So in terms of staff that might be available I know that the way our local radio likes to operate is a lot of interviews. So if we were going to get something on the radio, it would probably, be an interview. And further along in the process, I would feel confident I wouldn't be providing misinformation, but I'm not quite there yet. So does anybody have any ideas about how we might do some radio interviews at some point, once we have the census data, probably?
Have Charlotte do it.
Unfortunately, if I can respond, thank you for your vote of confidence, but on behalf of the county, my role, I wouldn't be providing, I guess, community outreach directly. I really my role is to just help guide any legal questions you have about the process, and staff as well through any of those hoops. But again, thank you, and that I just wanted to clarify my role as the county council representative.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Paul. And I think, Mary, you had started to raise your hand, and Sherry has her hand raised.
My question, and I did send an email to staff about suggested contact points, many of which I'm sure staff already has covered, but I wanted to be sure that governmental bodies were notified that this process is taking place, including the tribal governments of all the different tribes. And certainly the Hispanic Alliance would be important as well. But I think to go that extra step and say, this is happening, we're inviting, and I just wanted to be sure that those people, those groups were contacted. And this may already, as I say, be done by staff, but I just want to be sure that it was.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. So thank you, Mary. I did get your information too. So we were making sure that we had, contacted all those communities that you had listed too. So we are working on that. And also we will reach out to do some investigating there to see how we can get on the radio. So I will look into that. So maybe we can figure out who our expert is. Maybe that would be Leaf, but we'll do some interviews with the radios. And maybe we can prepare a flyer. I looked at some of what the other counties were doing with their community outreach, and I've seen them preparing some flyers. So we could also work on that and get those posted out and share that with all the commissioners also.
Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Sherry.
I was just going to suggest that in addition to press announcements or releases to the radio stations, that you consider also preparing 30-second PSA statements that could be listed in the community calendars portion of the radio station announcements, and just announcing our meetings and letting people know in advance how they can participate in the meetings. I think would be a good way to get the word out. I don't think the public, in all honesty, I don't think the public really knows much about us at this point. In my dealings with the general public so far, when I tell them that I'm on the Redistricting Commission, they sort of look at me like, what's that? And I, if I get that much of a reaction, usually they fall asleep. But so I think that it might behoove us to do some outreach to the radio programmers and actually ask them. Usually there's KMUD and KZYX have hour-long public affairs programs, and I would recommend targeting those programmers and asking them to do an hour-long program. But one of the things that's going to be very key is that they're going to want somebody to talk to on the radio. So the commission should consider how it goes about choosing the voice that it wants to use for purposes of getting the word out.
I think there's also, there's always multiple people interviewed at once can work out well, especially, I don't know if Leaf could be available to correct things that, just to keep, part of the problem with the radio format is that, I guess the problem with a lot of media formats is that the retraction is on page 5. In the case of the radio, the retraction often isn't there at all. And so definitely making sure that in terms of the technical side, that we're going to be doing kind of more outreach and try to find a way to get this to be a little more exciting for people, to understand this is sort of the base where really foundational stuff for how the rest of the democracy works. I just personally know I want to make sure that I don't do anything that causes any sort of false rumors. That's something, I don't know what Leaf's availability is for things like that. But he's got his hand raised, so I think we're about to find out.
Thank you, Chairman Farmer. I would be happy to assist, but being this is the Citizens Advisory Committee, most likely the spokesperson should be the chair or someone who's been appointed by your group as one of their members to speak, be the main speaker. But I would be happy to assist in any interview that I thought that I might be helpful with.
Well, I see no reason. I mean, as we kind of understand this better, and obviously as we get the census data, there could be even a series of interviews with Leaf, the chair, and each of you guys, or some of the rest of the board as well, that are more familiar with the other regions and are going to be doing the outreach. I don't know if this is always the way it goes, but during our appointment process, we were all appointed based on what district we're from, and so that should be reflected in the way that we do our outreach and engage with the radio questions. Because I actually feel pretty good about a lot of these, but I have not spent much time other than in Mendocino and District 4, to be honest. I don't think other than I've only gone along the coast. I really don't know about that part of the map, for example. So I think we definitely need to make sure that while the chair is one way to look at it, we need to make sure that we have people from the other regions reaching out to their communities as well. Go ahead. Is your hand still up, Leaf, or is it a digital phenomenon? Go ahead.
I failed to mention that our executive office is the lead agency in this process as far as our staff is concerned, and I didn't want to jump in there and step on anybody's toes. I think it has to come from the Citizens Advisory Committee, either the chair or someone appointed by the committee that's on their committee to be a spokesman. But if Sherry and the executive office wanted me to help out, I certainly would. I didn't mean to jump in front of that line, so I take my direction from the executive office there.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
Oh, I was just going to say, and of course I defer to Sherry on the executive office, but for purposes of any, for example, a radio interview, the only thing for the Brown Act you want to keep in mind is that as long as there's not a majority of the Redistricting Commission on that radio show, then we'd be fine in terms of the Brown Act at a public meeting. And I know that may sound somewhat counterintuitive when we're talking about a radio show that's a broadcast to the public. However, it isn't a formal public meeting, and we want to avoid maybe treading into those waters if we have more than 1 or 2 members at one time on any radio show. Thank you.
Okay.
Makes sense. I think I'm starting to understand the Brown Act, so I appreciate it. Go ahead, Paula.
Okay. During the 2020 census, when we were out doing lots of public engagement, I did a lot of radio interviews. Don't have a problem doing it. What I would like, and I think would be beneficial to all of us, if we could kind of come up with our little bullet points of the kind of information, just very simple definition, what it is, what we're doing. You know, this is the follow-up to that 2020 census we bugged you about. And just so that we have kind of a script that we're all working from, because as I say, after that, people then ask questions, and if we can't answer them, we defer. But lots of times it's a good way to get out to speak to people. You know, I did a couple down in Wallala, which has a bigger audience than one would think, but I think we've got a number of places that we can get out to. We just need to figure out how to work on the script and the.
Is that something? It occurred to me as you were speaking, Paula, that you were an obvious person to kind of take the lead on this, if that's something you'd like to do. And then maybe you're the one that brings on the rest of us for interviews, if that's, or pushes certain questions towards people from the other districts. But you already have the connections through the League of Women Voters and through your census work.
Yeah.
And I feel like you have some momentum there that we might just take advantage of.
I would be willing to kind of draft something that we could all look at and see, one, you know, if it makes sense, and if everybody feels that it covers it. It probably won't be done for another week or so, because I've got a couple of things I'm doing, but I would be willing to do that as kind of an outline, and then give it to Sherry to give out to everybody.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
I was going to suggest, and it sounds like Paula was thinking along these lines, but for purposes of the Brown Act, again, it might be worth agendizing this for a meeting if you want to collect the input of all the and have a discussion among all of the members of the commission on what items you want to say. However, I think you could also work with if you wanted to not delay or have it require input from the whole commission as to exactly what items you would go over. I think there is quite a resource on our website and through our recent trainings that you could call from yourself and certainly be able to speak clearly to based on your experience. If you did want input from the group, we could put it on the agenda for the next meeting and go more specifically into some bullet points. The other option for the commission is to consider creating an ad hoc committee that just a couple of members that talk about, 2 members that would talk about maybe coming up with some bullet points to use for an outreach strategy through the radio and the like.
Go ahead, Peter. You're
Peter,
still
you're muted.
Okay, I'm back on the air. So I was going to ask that the staff, and I suppose this is probably Sherry's role, supply us, each individual commissioner, with a list of the media contacts that press announcements are being sent out to. And I ask for this simply so that if I know that the radio stations in my area are already covered, if I know that the local news outlets in my area are already covered, then I'm not going to make any special effort to reach out to them because I know they're already getting the press announcements. But if I see that an organization that distributes information to the public regularly isn't getting the press releases, then that would alert me to advise Sherry about it or add that to the list, or make an effort on my part to reach out to that group and make sure they know about what's going on. So is it possible for the staff to supply us with a list of the media contacts? So I have it in writing and I know who's getting what. I just don't want to, waste time my time or the staff time reaching out to entities that are already being reached out to.
Yes, through the chair. Yes, I can definitely do that. We can get you that information within the next couple of days.
So what does the rest of the commission think about putting together an ad hoc to work on the script that Paula was describing? And do I have a second person who'd like to be on that?
Well, if I may speak again, I think it's a great idea to have Kyle and Paula be an ad hoc committee, and specifically to talk on the public affairs programs. I think I make the case, Kyle, you're based in the inland area of the county, the eastern side. Paula, you're based on the coastal side. I think that's a great balance. And these days, my experience with public affairs programs on the local radio stations is, it's all done by phone. So you don't have to go down to the radio station and actually sit in the studio. You're just going to be talking to a single person. If you have any more than really two people in one of these programs, you just lose any kind of continuity. So my recommendation would be, I think it's a great idea for the chair and the vice chair of this committee to be appointed as an ad hoc committee. And unless I'm speaking out of turn, I would make the motion that they be appointed as an ad hoc committee for the purposes of informing the public informing the public via the local radio stations about the work of the commission in redistricting.
So I do see in my script here that a motion can be made within this item. Is the establishment of an ad hoc a motion that's work here?
Sherry, I think Sherry's nodding, and I would agree that would be appropriate.
Okay. Do I have a second for that?
I'll second.
We'll put it to a vote. Peter?
Aye.
Dee?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Paula? You're muted, but I read your lips. But I guess you want to try again with
Okay, yes, yes.
And Kyle says yes.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to our first contentious vote. We've been 100% unanimous at this point. So we'll also definitely review some of what staff already has together about what they've been putting out, and then Paul and I will come up with some script bullet points and get in touch with Sarah Reith and some others. And I personally am going to want to do some more historical research, as I mentioned, to be able to feel like I can speak intelligently about this. So I'll be reaching out to Leaf for some data points there. Charlotte.
And I was just going to add, Chair Farmer, also that yes, you can certainly, the ad hoc can reach out to staff for any support you need in preparing for this issue.
One thing I was looking for that I couldn't find was just a list of all the different supervisors since as long as there's been supervisors. I was curious about where they had all been carried over time. Is that something that exists somewhere? On Wikipedia, Carrie Brown's still in office. That doesn't need to be answered right now, but if staff is aware of a spreadsheet like that, I would be curious to see it.
Well, yeah, we will look into that for you, Chair. Thank you.
And Leaf, I look forward to seeing your musical chairs maps. I guess we're done with item 4. We already voted on this. Was there any additional comments we want to make before moving on to, sorry, 8, it's getting dark out here. Any additional comments before we move on to number 9?
No.
So on the 14th, there'll be a Board of Supervisors meeting. So we're going to be discussing the process for the upcoming board meeting. Is that
Yes.
something that Sherry could introduce us to?
Yeah. So yes, Chair. So on September 14th, there will be a public hearing with the Board of Supervisors and the Redistricting Committee. And the item will be at approximately tentative time of 1:30. So on the 14th. And what we'd like to recommend to the committee is to have the introduction of the commission, which staff can do, and have a chair update, and then also a staff update, maybe talk about the census data and legislative changes, and go over the timeline, and then we'll also have public comment. So that was recommendations for some items for the 14th.
That makes sense. In past years, with the census data available, has this meeting been one in which there was already sort of more substantial information being provided to the board? Or is this normal for it to be? Go ahead, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair Farmer. So I think because this year the California statute was amended and has more specific criteria for how many public meetings and the waiting period after the data for drawing maps and the like, I don't know if there was such, the structure was very defined that we could really look back to historical, for historical purposes to help inform how we proceed. But I think in light of where we're at in the process, the fact that the commission was appointed recently and we've had 2 meetings before the next supervisors meeting next week, it makes sense to do sort of an overview for the board of where your commission is at, hearing the updates on data, awaiting formal data, and if any updates have happened in the last week, and then also providing another opportunity, as we do at every public meeting for the Redistricting Commission, to consider any public input on communities of interest and redistricting process.
Makes sense. So is there any commission comment on this agenda item? Charlotte, is your hand
Public
still
comment
up?
has been received for agenda item 9.
Okay, does anybody have a motion to, I guess, agree that we'll give a update to the supervisors on the 14th?
I don't think you need a motion.
Excuse me, Chair Farmer, if I may,
Yeah.
I was just going to add, this was our kind of general recommended overview from staff for the meeting. We did also want to, I apologize. The timeline, the specific timeline we'll talk about next. That's a separate agenda item. Thank you.
But I wouldn't think we need to vote on.
I wouldn't
a
think so either,
presentation
but
to
I've
the
got a
board.
cheat sheet right here that suggests that we do.
It says you do. Okay, Charlotte, weigh in.
Sorry, I'm a little overzealous with raising and lowering the hand. I was just going to say you can certainly vote on it, but if if the commission confirms, agrees with the general outline for how we present with you at the meeting, if you want to do a vote, that's fine, since we have the agendized item.
It doesn't seem necessary to me. I just am reading the script. So we can move, unless anybody disagrees, we can move on to agenda item number 10 to reconfirm these proposed dates for the upcoming meeting. Do we all have those dates ahead of us? There's one to be determined of a Board of Supervisors redistricting hearing. And I remember D from our last meeting suggested that we include a weekend public meeting session. So those are two things we might want to talk about a little bit more. But first, let's hear from Peter.
Yeah, let's see him. I just wanted to say, I think the to be decided item is listed in the presentations that we have in our meeting. This one, sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna have, I'm sorry, Commissioner. I was gonna have Nadia put it up on the screen so we could all look at it together too.
Right. And I believe that the to be decided date is listed as November 18th. So I would suggest that we go ahead and set that as the date, with the understanding that we're going to have several meetings between now and then. And if the date needs to change, we can amend this timeline. But just for consistency purposes, I think if nothing else, we should go ahead and use the November 18th date. And I would make a motion to amend our timeline to establish November 18th for the Special Board of Supervisors redistricting hearing number 4. At least for the time being, I think that that's a good move.
Do we want to make that motion now, or do we want to see if there's any other date changes or additions we want to make before we have the motion include both of those? Sherry?
Yes, Chair. So the November 18th date is, we have polled the Board of Supervisors, and that date does appear to work for them, but we will be taking that to the board to get approval to finalize it. So we should have put to be determined continue for that date, but we would like, we're hoping and we're really pretty confident that will be November 18th, but we will be taking it to the board for approval to add the special meeting.
Okay. So that is not something for us to vote on right now. That's something for the Board of Supervisors.
And then if I may, there at the prior meeting, it was suggested to have some additional workshops added. So staff, we just put some additional dates or weeks. So September 20th, the week of, or maybe the September 28th, the week of. So we just added some additional recommendations on there for the committee. If you have specific dates that work.
So I know Dee, you had your hand raised, but first I just want to ask Leaf, between the 20th and the 28th, is it more likely that we'll have some real numbers to work with on the if we added something on the week of the 28th than the week of the 20th?
Oh, you're talking about September?
Yes.
Well, according to the notice by the Census Bureau, we should have some data by that date. But again, that's not in our control. So, you know, we can only go by what they're telling us at the moment.
Do you had your hand raised?
Sherry answered my question. I was wondering if the 20th, these extra dates in here, if those were available for additional meetings. So I think it may be too early to decide if we need more meetings right now. Maybe by the next time, well, at least I think we should meet the week of the 20th after we get the data and start there instead of waiting until October.
You had also mentioned a weekend meeting, which I sort of assumed. I know my wife teaches music classes specifically on the weekend sometimes, and a lot of working parents can go to that, and they can't necessarily be doing things during the weekdays. So I kind of assumed that was the idea behind that, and I think in that case it would be a good thing to try to make sure we add in somewhere in the first third of the process, probably.
Yeah. I really strongly believe we shouldn't wait until October 7th for our next meeting, though, to start talking about this. I think meeting as soon as we can after the data is available is our best bet to get going. So the week of the 20th, either on a weeknight or on the weekend, either one.
Are there any other comments on the idea of having a meeting on the week of the September 20th? I would add.
I would be willing.
I think I heard Mary say I would be willing. Mendocino County Internet is I would also add that if we did not have any data at that point, then we would push the meeting to the week of the 28th.
I agree.
I agree.
Do we need a motion?
Does this time at Tuesday nights work for people?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so do I have a motion? What date is the Tuesday of the September 20th?
21st.
So it sounds. Do you want to put your motion forth?
Yeah, I move that we schedule an additional meeting on the evening of Tuesday, September 21st, to start the process after the census data is received. If the data isn't received by that date, we push it out to October 28th.
September
28th. September 28th.
When,
Do I have a second?
I will second.
Thanks, Paula. And we'll put it to a vote. Dee, I think I know how you'll vote.
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Paula?
Yes.
And Kyle, yes. Can you guys hear the elk starting to rut behind me?
Are they fighting?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So and then we'll
They're
I think
advertised.
we'll leave it with this meeting, and but I definitely want to keep on Dee's idea about having a weekend public outreach workshop.
I have to say, I think it was Paula's idea for the weekend. I'm
Okay, Paula.
credit for it. I think it's a good idea, but I can't take credit for it.
Sherry, you have
No,
a
it
hand up?
doesn't matter. It's everybody's. So the only thing we might say is we might want to think about when the time changes and see if we can do something before that. If we were going to do something later in the day. And I would have no idea on what to recommend for a time for a meeting. So
So are we looking at when you fall back?
I think
well, just a suggestion, depending on the time we were going to think about doing one.
I don't think that's till November 7th.
Oh, really? Okay, good. Then not a
I think
problem.
it's the first weekend in December.
Um,
Yeah, November 7th. So we'll probably looking in October for a weekend meeting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I
How about
suggest
the
we
9th or the 16th?
the 9th or the 16th, you said?
We are on the 7th, so maybe the 16th would be better.
Okay.
So do we want to move one of these to that
Do you
date,
want me to
or
make
do
a
we want to
motion?
add one in? Sherry has something to say first.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just wanted to make a correction so we can make another motion on this, and it will be a special meeting on November 18th. The board does not need to vote on that, so it will be November 18th, a special meeting.
Great.
So I received that from staff. So thank you, staff, for listening into the meeting. I appreciate it.
Okay,
Do you
good.
want me to amend my motion to include October 16th?
October 16th as, yes. Yes, and then we could add November 18th.
Okay, so do I have to restate the whole thing? I don't know if I can remember it.
Peter, go ahead first, so we don't have to amend it again.
I'm not, I think I'm good. Okay, the only thing, I'm a little hesitant about committing to a weekend in October because, that's fine for us as commissioners, but we are asking the staff to commit to doing that as well. And I'm a little hesitant and would like to get the staff's feedback on an appropriate weekend that they feel they can make themselves available before we just go ahead and set this. And I don't see any reason why we have to set it tonight since we're having several other meetings before October at this point. And so I would vote no to setting a date in October tonight.
Go ahead, Mary.
I agree with the concerns about staff, and if we're going to ask them to do a weekend, I think looking to see works best for them as well as us, and also what time works for them, because they have their families that they're dealing with on the weekends as well, is a good idea. And that we come back to this and let staff have some time, at least maybe to our next September or the 2nd September meeting.
Okay.
Go ahead, Paula.
I don't mind coming back and readdressing it. I think the reason that I mentioned it was in some of my readings, when there was the discussion of at least 4 meetings, it was also mentioned to make sure that they were outside regular hours and consider weekends for people who work during the week. So it wasn't just willy-nilly. It is something that has been, has been written out there.
Go
But
ahead,
I'm
Sherry.
trying to wait a little bit and look at it.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you. We appreciate your thoughtfulness for the staff. We appreciate that. So what we can do is offer to pull the staff and report back at the next workshop when we can make ourselves available for the proposed weekend night meetings. So, we're happy to do that. Have some dates for weekend meetings proposed to the committee.
Is there also the option to move an otherwise scheduled meeting to a weekend, depending on how much participation we're getting on these already scheduled meetings?
I believe yes, we can do that.
So that seems like another reason that we might as well wait on this, and also get some feedback from some of the groups that might be getting people out there and about what timing makes sense on that side as well. Go ahead, Dee.
I agree. I mean, it's probably best to wait before scheduling any more to see how we get going, if we even need more meetings. And I think the idea of maybe if the number of meetings we have seems to be sufficient, moving one that was already scheduled to the weekend. So just voicing support in that thought. So I think we should just vote on the September 21st meeting and leave it at that.
Sounds good. Thanks for breaking the inertia, Peter. I think everybody ended up agreeing. So, so I think, am I crazy, or did we already hear a motion to have a September 21st meeting?
We have a motion and a second. I think we just need a vote.
Need a vote? Okay. What about you, Dee?
Aye.
Can I ask
Peter?
the chair to take the motion?
Did I make the motion?
No, can I ask the chair to restate the motion so we know what we're voting on?
We have
This
a
is
motion
Nadia
here
Tipton.
to.
Chair, if you'd like, I captured the motion. I can read it.
Okay.
Dee's motion was to add a meeting on September 21st, Tuesday in the evening, if we receive the census data. If we do not receive the census data timely for the September 21st meeting, we will push that date out to September 28th. And we had the motion by Dee Pallison and seconded by Supervisor Cohen, or Commissioner Cohen.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So I'll start again with the vote. Dee?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Paula?
Yes.
And Kyle, yes. So that brings us to any proposed agenda item topics for the upcoming meeting. So I think staff has a report on input received from the public.
Were we going to report out about outreach?
Okay.
And so these are items for the next meeting.
Yeah.
Mr.
I
Chairman,
have a question that,
I think Mary, did you have a question?
it was Paul who had a question.
Okay.
Do you want me to ask it?
Yes, please.
It's actually for Charlotte. It's actually for Charlotte. I just gotten some news, excuse me, on my phone about a potential either lawsuit or an injunction changing the date for the end of the census from December 14th to January 14th. What impact would that have on any of us? And you may not know at this point, because I just saw it came out this afternoon.
If I may, through the chair, I had not heard about that specific lawsuit. I suspect, and I want to do a little research and look into this. Some of the pending lawsuits have been specific to the California Redistricting Commission, so it might be what you're speaking of might be the commission specific to the redistricting of our assembly and state senate districts. However, I'm not aware of any legislation or litigation specific to the timeline for counties in redistricting. We could put an item on the next agenda to just report back if there's been any changes in the deadlines, either through litigation or legislation.
Thank you.
Peter, you were about to say something as well.
Well, I was actually ready to make a motion to adopt the proposed agenda topics for the next meeting. But I did need a clarification, which was, are we talking about the meeting of with the Board of Supervisors? Or are we talking about, let's see, 7th to 14th, the 21st?
The 21st.
So we're talking about the 21st. So I would make a motion to adopt the proposed agenda topics for the meeting of the 21st as presented by the staff on the agenda.
I assume that there was no public comment on this item.
Thank you, Chair. No, there has not been any public comment received for item 11.
So do I have a second for Peter's?
We had a
motion?
couple things added in that we need, so the motion says that as presented as staff on the agenda, but we, like I mentioned, outreach, and then Charlotte has said reporting back about any changes in legislation, so those should be added in, I think.
I'll accept those as friendly amendments.
So do I have a second?
And didn't we have a
including those two amendments?
clarification that might be the 28th?
Yeah, that was in the other motion.
The if-then protocols of the motion. Peter, do you accept the subsequent modifications to your motion?
Correct, I do.
I'll second.
Thanks, Dee. I'll put it to a vote. Peter?
Aye.
Dee?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Paula?
Yes.
And Kyle, yes. So I think with that, we can adjourn the meeting.
Good night.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.